Hey everybody, it's Vera Wild, and I think I am overdue to kind of revisit my topic of labels. And as before, this will include a few I didn't talk about last time. It will sort of clarify some of the things that I said last time. This was years ago last time I talked about this. So I'm going to talk about some of the labels and terms that can come up and apply to cross-dressers, gender fluid people. I'll get to all of these. So I am going to be, checking notes on this. So let's start with transgender. Transgender is intended to be an umbrella term, and some people do use it very specifically to refer to anyone who has transitioned fully from the gender that they were assigned at birth to the other side of the gender spectrum, as in male to female, female to male. It is really supposed to be an umbrella term, though. It is supposed to apply to basically anyone who has transitioned away from their birth gender, but it does not necessarily mean transitioning to the opposite gender from where they started. So, like myself, I don't generally use the term transgender to refer to myself because I think it is confusing for people, since I don't intend to ever fully transition to life as a woman full time. But I have undoubtedly transitioned away from living full time as a cis male, which was how I was born. So it's often best to clarify with the term, if you're referring to someone who has gone through a full transition from one to the other in terms of the normal gender binary. I shouldn't have said normal. That's a word I need to be careful about when using this, but the commonly understood gender binary of male to female is to either say trans woman or trans man, and the gender that you use is the one they've transitioned into. So someone started male, transitioned to female, that is a trans woman. Someone who started as male, started as female, transitioned to male, that's a trans man. So that's transgender. Now, the term that I have used for the majority of my expressing my femininity was crossdresser. And that was one that I was always partial to and was for a very long time. And I liked it because I felt it had the least baggage. And that's another thing that I'm going to sort of get technical with some of these terms, but by and large, these are not dictionary definitions I'm giving you. These are my more colloquial understandings of being in and existing in this community. So I liked crossdresser because it was strictly descriptive. I would dress across the gender line. I was a male who dressed as a female. I would cross dress. So I liked that. And like I said, it didn't have nearly as much baggage as some of the other terms that you can find for people who dress as a gender that isn't the one that they were assigned at birth, such as, say, for instance, transvestite, which is a perfectly acceptable term. I personally don't like it because, to my ear at least, it's always had a clinical ring to it. And also, I think, I love the Rocky Horror Picture Show to death, but I think it's a little bit of an over-sexualized term because of its association with the song Sweet Transvestite and how sexualized that show is. Again, I love it, but that did sort of taint the term transvestite with a bit of baggage that I personally never really cared for. There's drag queen. Now, a drag queen is not necessarily a crossdresser, they are a form of cross-dressing, but they are not necessarily transgender. So drag queen specifically is a performer who presents as female in a highly exaggerated and camp fashion. Performer is the big thing to underline here. So I do perform in drag shows at times. I mostly perform in burlesque these days, but I do still perform in drag shows as a drag queen. But if I just go out like this and I'm just hanging out with friends or whatever, I would not call myself a drag queen because I'm not performing. I'm just being. So, and the other thing about drag queens is it's not actually a requirement that you be a gay man, but drag performance is very rooted in gay male culture. And while it has started to branch out from that, there can sometimes be a possessiveness about it. So that's a term that applies pretty narrowly and isn't one to be used in sort of broad strokes. So there's a couple of pejorative terms that I'm just going to bring up because people may not realize that they are in fact pejorative. So there's tranny, which, you know, on the one hand you think, well, it's a shortening for transgender. It is, but again, it's all about context and the way it tends to be used. It is used as a derogative term. It's used as a belittling term. It's not something that somebody would self-identify as. And similarly, there is she-male. We can thank porn for that particular term. And I understand why it came about, because it was somewhat descriptive. A she-male is generally, again, within the pornographic world, is a someone who presents feminine but still has male genitalia. But again, it's not one that anyone will self-identify with unless they themselves are a sex worker of some fashion, whether they work in porn or model in that way or what have you. And even like the few people I've known who work in the sex industry, they only use that term professionally. Like, nobody likes the term she-male. So that's another one to avoid. The one that I really have the most distaste for, that is sort of porn and fetish related, that's trap. And I get it. It's a very specific stripe of sort of the fetishization of gender nonconforming or transgender people. So what a trap is it is a usually young, incredibly convincing and passable, passable as a woman individual. So you're usually talking petite, smooth-skinned, maybe a little bump of a chest, but still having male genitalia. Now, the thing about a trap specifically is the entire thing is that you would never guess that they have a penis until you see it. And again, I don't want to kink shame anyone who has an appeal to that, and I know sort of the trap archetype is very big in anime and manga as well, and I don't want to shame anyone for that, but the reason I dislike the term as much as I do is because it feeds into a notion that is at the heart of a lot of hatred thrown towards transgender people, which is the idea that we are deliberately trying to trick folks. That's where so much of the violent hatred, especially from homophobic or transphobic men, comes from, is the idea that they could be hitting on a girl and they get them in bed and suddenly it's like, haha, we tricked you, I have a penis so you're gay now, which is preposterous. But that idea of transgender people being deliberately deceptive, that is very much linked to a term like trap, because what's a trap? We got you. We tricked you. I honestly think it is a dangerous term, or at the very least the baggage that comes with it perpetuates something that is flat out dangerous. Also sort of linked to fetish and kink end of things is sissy. Now, traditionally a sissy would just have been a term like for a effeminate male. They were called sissies, or sometimes just someone perceived to be a weak male was termed a sissy. These days it has a much more specific use, especially online. So sissies, and unlike, say, she-male or tranny, people will self-identify as sissy because it is as I said, it is a kink, and depending on the degree to which some people actually engage in it, it could even be considered a lifestyle. So being a sissy is very youthfully oriented, super feminized, like pink, frills, lace, big sort of flouncy, super exaggerated, big blonde wig, like blonde hair, very big, with that whole sort of thing. And it's also very, very sexual in nature. So, which is why you shouldn't use that term to describe anyone who you don't know for a fact self-identifies as such and is out as such, because a sissy is a highly sexualized thing to be, which is fine. Absolutely no shame to be had in that, but know about the baggage that comes with it before you use that term to describe yourself, and definitely do not use that term to describe someone else if you do not know for a fact that they actually identify that way. So what else have we got? Okay, so there's androgynous. Androgyny is just sort of a general way of presenting. It's not necessarily an identity. Androgyny is more of a style. But androgyny is, and different people on the LGBTQ, trans spectrum may or may not choose to present androgynously. So it's not linked to any one specific identity, but presentation-wise, androgyny is the minimalization of telltale sexual characteristics. So, David Bowie, early in his career, is a solid example. I have suddenly forgot the name of the woman from the Eurythmics, but that's another one. So it's this sort of minimizing everything, like minimize the chest, minimize the crotch. We're going for sleek, we're going for smooth, we're going for, I can't tell because the sex characteristics that I normally look for to be certain man or woman aren't very prominent, and I don't know what to make of that. That's androgyny. The flip side of that is something that I do in some performance things that I do, which is a term that I use called gender fuck, which is basically the opposite of androgyny, where you overemphasize the sexual characteristics, but you do a mix of them that is deliberately confusing. So whereas androgyny might try and minimize any protrusion of the chest, minimize any possible bulge in the crotch, genderfuck, when I do that, which is I have a hosting persona that I consider to be that. I wear my largest breast forms, and I also, not only do I not tuck, I pack so that I have a really obscene bulge. And so it is deliberately confusing and contradictory. There is gender fluid, which is how I presently choose to identify. And it works very well for me because my gender is fluid. It doesn't stay put. Sometimes I'm feeling masculine, sometimes I'm feeling feminine, sometimes it's a bit in the middle, but it doesn't stay in one place. It is a fluid, moving thing. And so that's where that sort of lands. When you get into something like gender queer, that is, we're going to get into a couple of terms that there's a lot of bleed over between them, and the distinction between them can sometimes be a little bit fuzzy, but I'm going to do my best. So, genderqueer is generally going to be someone who they have a sense of gender, but it doesn't really land in either distinctly masculine or distinctly feminine. So we're getting right now into non-binary options, because pretty much everything else I've talked about up to this point, except possibly the deliberately confusing ones, does still adhere to the gender binary: male, female. These are the options. Are you this presenting as this? Are you this presenting as this? Are you this transitioning to this? Vice versa. But there's this whole middle area in here. And that, I exist in there for a little bit because I will move back and forth, but I won't go, all one, or I'll end up in the middle. So non-binary gender identities, they are the ones who fall somewhere in the middle. So things like non-binary or genderqueer. And honestly, there may be a specific technical difference between those two. It seems to just be a matter of preference. Some people are still made very uncomfortable by the word queer and don't care to use it, whereas non-binary has that sort of more official ring to it. So, personal preference. But people who identify as either genderqueer or non-binary, you're usually dealing with someone who, they do have a sense of self, but that sense of self doesn't align cleanly with either male or female. And it's not a moving thing. It's not like it's not like me, gender fluid, where it's just wibbly wobbly all over the place. It is fixed. It's just fixed somewhere in this gray zone. And this is where you will find people more often than not who use gender neutral pronouns, they, them, because they don't feel solidly enough or comfortable enough with either he or she, because they don't feel a connection to those firm identities. So also along similar lines, there's bigender, which is someone who actually feels that they are both simultaneously. There's also agender. Now, agender is different from non-binary, because non-binary or genderqueer, they do have a gender identity. It's just falling in this gray area. Agender is someone who does not have any sense of gender at all. That's not to say they have no sense of self, but their sense of self does not involve any sense of being agender. It's just not part of their makeup and of their identity. So that's sort of where that lands. I think that's all the ones I wanted to cover. As I said, this was kind of an update. It's been a long time since I talked about this. I think I'm due to revisit some of my old topics and update them and give a little bit of a fresher perspective on things. So labels, options, there are more than I went through. There are as many labels as you can think of. These are just the ones that I encounter the most, and I felt that I had at least enough of an understanding to be able to talk about them. So, are there any others you want to throw out? Any that you've heard that you want an explanation of? I'd be happy to help. So you can leave a comment, you can write me, email and Twitter and all that. That'll be in the description. So until next time.